Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the YouTube channel grecochess, the channel where we discuss, we analyze, we comment, and we talk about all aspects of the game of chess. In this video, I'm going to show to you the game I played yesterday night at the Queen's Chess Club during a tournament that was called the Amateur Two-Player Championship. And let me first share the relevant information about the tournament and the rules. And here we are. The exact name of the tournament was the QCC Mini Queen Chess Club Amateur Two-Player Team Championship. How does it take place? Players are supposed to have teams of two, meaning every player must have a teammate, and they're going to play 4 games. Each of them plays 4 games on 4 different Fridays, starting from January 9th, followed by the 16th, the 23rd, and the last round yesterday night was the 30th. Time control G90 D5 means when the game starts, players have 90 minutes on their clock, meaning 1.5 hours, and when it's a time to, of course, when your opponent is thinking, your clock does not move, but when it is your turn to move for the 5 seconds, first 5 seconds, the clock does not move. This is the so-called delay. And then it continues going downwards from where it stopped before. And you're supposed to complete all your moves before the clock shows 000. Otherwise, you are timed out. And no matter how great your position, you lose unless your opponent has insufficient material, then it's a draw. My situation was the following. I couldn't find a teammate, and I went to Floral Park where the tournament takes place on the 9th of January, and I didn't know if I was allowed to participate or not. Fortunately, at the very last moment, there was another player in the same situation, and we formed the team. And since we formed it at the last moment, we called the team the last moment. In the first 3 rounds, I started with one loss on round one, 2 wins on rounds 16 and 23rd. My partner lost all his 3 games, and he was going to lose also the fourth. So our team was not going to do well. But the question is, how well could I do? Because I started with 3 players rated higher than me, and I got 2 wins and 1 loss, which is quite a nice result. And on round number 4, I was also partnered with a player that was higher than me. A little bit more information about my player, my partner. Uh, my partner's name is Zoe Wong, and her rating, as you see here, the regular, that's the only one that's important for this event, is, or at least was, 1651. I say was because after the tournament, all ratings were going to change. And compare this with mine, and let's see if I can bring the screen. And here we are, and mine was 1551. It was going to go up to 1631, will go up on February 1st after the previous December Swiss tournament, but still 1631 is less than 1651, so no matter which one you consider, Zoe was the favorite, but not by too much. She had a rating a little bit higher than mine, whether it's 100 points or 20, depending how you count it. But we are going to move now to the chessboard of chess.com, and we're going to show the game. What I mean by showing the game is that I have here in my hands this score sheet, and I'm going to copy the moves one by one on the chessboard. After every move, the computer is going to show the evaluation, meaning who is doing better. Positive number means white is doing better, negative means black is doing better, and of course the exact number is telling us by how much white or black is doing better. Also, the computer will show with arrows which move it thinks, it quote unquote thinks it considers as the best. It's going to evaluate the move with 2 exclamation points is brilliant, the best possible. One exclamation move point is a great. A star means the best possible, meaning if your best move happens not to be great or brilliant, but still the best move, you'll see a star. A check mark means it's excellent, meaning not exactly the best, but very near. A checkpoint means a good one. And on the negative category, question mark followed by exclamation point means it's inaccuracy, question mark is a mistake, and two question marks means it's a blunder. Also, the computer, after every move of every player, will show the five top moves for the other player. Zoe had the white pieces and I had the black. I had the black, I mean. And Zoe starts with the most popular move for white, which is pawn to e4. White, this is usually the most popular, followed by pawn to d4. Then you have the English opening pawn to, let me show some arrows to show what I talk about. And then the next one is pawn goes to c4. You may have knight to f3, or you may have pawn to g3. These are the best moves, but you may want to surprise your opponent. You may want to do things like pawn to b3, or like knight to c3, or things like that. Or some players even may put their pawn to e3. But Joy decided not to try any of these things. Start the standard way, or the most popular, pawn to e4. And I reply, how do what as usually reply? The most popular response is the Sicilian defense, followed by the symmetric one. The pawn goes here. One may want to do the Perk defense, pawn goes to d6, or may start with knights going either to c6, or if knight goes to f6, this is the Alec Heinz defense. Yes. But I play the one that I'm mostly familiar. Not that it's anything better than the others, but I have played so many times, I know quite well how to reply to that, how to continue that. The French, pawn to e6. And when white plays that way, and you see here it says book moves. The first two moves are moves from the opening theory, where players of all levels, especially middle and high levels, are very familiar with them, and they know how to react. And Zoe places a pawn to d4. Usually second move, it's either this you can see here. Sometimes you may want to put your knight on f3 or the other knight on c3. There are many ways, but pawn to d4 is the most popular one. And I reply against with the most popular one, pawn to d5. We're fighting for the control of the center. That's a whole story about. Next move. Here, white has a lot of choices. They can put the knight on c3 or the knight on d2, or they may want to exchange pawns or even put the bishop to d3. But Zoe decides to play the so-called advanced variation, which gives more space to white, pawn to e5. And if that's what white does, black has to reclaim as much space as possible, and that's why I send my pawn to c5. This is one of the most popular, meaning has been played most of the times, the most analyzed openings of the game. And now, Zoe is going to do something that during the game a little bit surprised me. Pawn from d4 to c5. It's still a book move. Why did it surprise me? Because Zoe is conceding a small part of the center. She had a wonderful pawn at d4 at the center, and now he's taking it away. And computer, although it thinks a book move from plus 0.42, from giving a 0.42 advantage to Zoe, is giving a 0.33 advantage for me. A turn of 0.75 pawns, 3/4 of a pawn. But still a book move. And I'm going to take the pawn back, even though the computer might prefer knight to c6. I don't want to be behind the pawn and have to fight how to reclaim it. And also develop my bishop. It's not just that I waste the move just to taking the pawn. I both take back the pawn and develop my bishop. That also threatens the f2 and not a bad move. What Zoe did is what I was expecting and fearing the most, even though the computer thinks it's only the fifth possible move. Queen to g4. And by the way, my move is excellent, and it's not a book move. We're leaving theory now. Until now, we had book moves meaning theory, and now we leave theory. And Zoe did the move I was concerned the most. I'm not going to say afraid, but definitely concerned. Queen goes to g4. Although computer thinks only the fifth best move, the problem with this move, the problem mean for black for me, is that it's aiming at g7. And if I let g7 go unchallenged, meaning I develop my knight to c6, to give an example, of bishop to d7, queen takes g7, and then not only that, I can survive with one pawn less, but then queen will take on h8 the rook and down the rook and forget it. How to reply? Computer wants me to sacrifice the pawn. You see, knight to e7, it says. And then it doesn't even think that taking the pawn is the best for white because then I put my rook on g8. You see that uh, computer thinks that bishop to d3 is the next best. But I didn't want to start with a pawn less, so I pushed the pawn to g6. Computer says it's an inaccuracy, and now once again, Zoe has the reply. Actually, just not the reply, has the advantage. You see, from 0.30 for me goes 0.36 for Zoe. I know that I'm creating holes on f6, h6, and g7, but I'm going to prepare for them. But at least I'm not starting losing a pawn. We completed the first 5 moves, and after my inaccuracy, Zoe is ahead by 0.36. Let's see how game will continue. Zoe wants to control the d4 square, especially after she used the d4 to take on c5, and sends the pawn to c3. Mistake, says the computer, and would like me to send my queen to b6. I don't want to take the queen too early. Usually it's not a good idea before you develop. Knight goes to c6 and threatening the pawn on e5. Zoe will send her knight to f3 to defend the pawn. And my queen goes to b6. Look at what's happening now. I'm attacking the pawn on f2. Computer thinks a mistake, wanted me to do it before. Would rather have my pawn to f6, but then I open my king too much. If Zoe takes it, the knight takes it back. Yes, for one moment I attack the queen, but my king is too exposed. That's why I didn't want to do it. And now Zoe has to worry about the pawn on f2. It's attacked twice by queen b6, bishop c5, defended only by the king on e1. That's why Zoe is going to send her queen to g3. I want to continue developing, and my knight goes to e7. Computer would rather have it go on h6. Don't know. On h6. Aha, here's a tricky. Yes, a bishop would take it, but then queen would take on b2 and threaten the rook. Because I was thinking, why on h6 where the bishop can take it supposedly for free, but not exactly free, because if queen takes b2, threatens rook at a, that the rook cannot be saved at all, and so on. And I send my knight to e7. It's not even among the top 5 moves that you see here. As you see here, this is the top 5 moves that the computer suggests for the player whose turn is to come. I send to e7, and it is an inaccuracy. There is a problem which I was glad that Zoe did not exploit. What is the problem? That, as you see here, if Zoe uh, sends the pawn to b4, where can my bishop go? It's attacked. It cannot go here. It will be taken by the pawn here, here, here. Anyway, it's lost. The best I could do is send my bishop to use my knight, take the pawn, sacrifice my knight for 2 pawns and check from here. Or threaten the queen, that's what the computer would think, to f5. And that's what I had in my mind. But if that happens, look what's happening. Pawn takes on c5, my knight will take on c3, or g3, then pawn takes the queen. That's what I had not seen too carefully, meaning it's not just like a queen for lesser material. Both exchange queens, and then I can take the rook on h1. Pawn takes on a7, rook takes on a7, and this is the continuation of the game. You see it here. And the game will go if something like what you see below in the small screen to the right. We are reaching an end game. We have two rooks versus rook, bishop, knight. I have two rooks and the knight versus rook, bishop, knight, meaning it looks as if will be ahead by in exchange for a pawn, but my knight on h1 is going to be lost, not safe at all. If both of us play the best possible way, at move 23, meaning I think 16 moves later or something like 15 moves later, I will have an ending that doesn't look too pleasant, but that is why computer did not like my knight going to e7. But so instead of uh, taking advantage and sending the pawn to b4, she plays what the computer shows is the second best move. Bishop goes to d3. Why? She was anticipating my next move. Inaccuracy is the computer. Pawn to b4 is the best. So it's a case of one move only being good, that would be the best, and even the second best possible is inaccuracy. But then I send my knight to f5. Attack the queen. And most of all, now Zoe cannot send the pawn to b4 because my bishop has enough squares to go back, e7 and f8. These squares were missing when the knight was on e7. But first of all, Zoe needs to see what she can do not to lose the queen. And the problem is that if the queen goes to a safe square like f4, g4, g5, my bishop takes on f2. That's not what Zoe wants. That's why she played exactly what I expected. You see here, bishop to 5 is the only one that can keep her ahead. Any other move, even the second best, is going to make me ahead. So she takes the knight at f5. And now I must take it back clearly, no question about the great moves in the computer. Well, okay, yes, it was a very good move, but not that difficult to spot. If you saw what was the alternative. Now, but there are two ways to take it, either with the e pawn from e6 or from the g6. One of them must land on f5. Which of the two? Computer has these two almost the same, a very small advantage if you take with the e pawn. I did it thinking it was much, much better because the g pawn would leave the g file open for white, for Zoe, with her queen on g3. And my rook on, I cannot castle. My rook on h8 would be in danger. Yes, can send it to f8, then I lose the h7 pawn. And Zoe can start pushing the h pawn, see how far I can go. And that's why I decided, let me take with my e pawn. This also gives one more pawn for my, one more square for my bishop at c8 that has yet to develop. So I take with the e pawn. We completed the first 10 moves. And now Zoe has an advantage of 0.59 after 10 moves. Now, this is not something that decides the game yet, but rather you have it and your opponent. Let's continue now. Let's see how game will go on. Zoe castles kingside, and from now on she doesn't need to keep her queen at g3 to protect the pawn on f2. I develop my bishop goes to e6 and also stop the pawn from pushing the e5. Of course, currently it cannot go ahead. It's going to be taken, but you don't want to give Zoe the possibility. Later on, put perhaps the rook on e1 or do something else and support the pawn and threaten with promotion. Most likely it's not going to promote, but most likely I'll have to sacrifice material to stop the promotion. Now Zoe thinks finally plays the pawn to b4 a little bit too late. I mean, it was the best move, yes, but too late to win material. My bishop goes back to e7. It was either e7 or f8. F8 is starting position too much. Also doesn't allow castling if I need it, although I was not planning to castle, but by doing so, when she did it, I felt it may not be very accurate because the pawn on c3 is too weak. It's only protected by the knight on b1. So if I attack it, Zoe has to keep the knight on b1, which means, of course, rook also stays on a1. That's not what you like. Bishop goes to e3 for Zoe, threaten my queen. I doubt that Zoe was thinking that there was even one out of 1,000 chances that I would not see it and lose my queen, but she develops her bishop with what's called a tempo. And my queen now is going to go to c7. And I'm attacking twice the e5 pawn, defended twice by the knight f3, queen g3. All I needed to do is find one more way to attack and win it. Not very easy because my bishop on e7 can go neither d6 nor f6 to attack, but maybe pawn to f6. Not a good move because Zoe takes it, and I can only exchange queens. I cannot win queen. And then bishop will take on f6. I don't know if that would be better, maybe. Let's see how game continues. Pawn to b5. Zoe attacks my knight. I didn't feel that was a good move for Zoe. In fact, meaning, of course, I felt happy myself because this is a one-move attack that is almost impossible to miss. I'm not going to let Zoe take my knight for free, unless, of course, I have a mating combination elsewhere, which I don't. It's very easy to defend the knight, and also this creates what's called an outpost, a hole where you can place your knight and it cannot be thrown away. And this is square c4. You cannot go there in one move, but you can go in two moves. First move, number one, goes to a5. Not attack there, but just in case, supported by the queen on c7. Knight goes to d4 for Zoe and attacking my bishop on e6. And my knight goes to c4, the wonderful outpost. Why do we call it outpost? Zoe cannot attack it. Cannot attack with pawns because one is in b5, the b file pawn, and the d file has already vanished. Bishops. She doesn't have a light color bishop. Of course, she should not sacrifice a rook or a queen for this knight. Maybe only with the two knights it could be exchanged. So, yes, it can be kicked out by knights. Of course, we're talking about even exchange. But until then, I have a very strong knight on Zoe's half the board. 15 moves have been completed and Zoe is ahead by 0.24. This is a very small difference. One serious mistake on either side can really change things dramatically. Zoe wants to take my bishop on e6. Until now, I had what's called the advantage of the two bishops. In most cases, and I underline in most, meaning not in all cases, having two bishops of two different colors is an advantage. Not an enormous, but it's better to have it, as I like to say, than the opponent having it, because these two bishops can control the entire board. And Zoe wanted perhaps to equalizing this department, meaning neither of us has a two bishop advantage. On my side, I didn't feel too concerned because, first of all, by this exchange, I undoubled my f pawns. And also my bishop on e6 is what is called a bad bishop, meaning it could not move forward. It was blocked both by the d5 and the f5 pawns. So Zoe decides to take on e6, and of course now only one move. I'm not going to sacrifice my queen. I'm not going to sacrifice my bishop. Mistakes as a computer. Look at that. Computer thinks a mistake. When Joy played it, I didn't feel it was a mistake, but I felt it was less than optimal. And on my side, I only have one move. You play it in, I wouldn't say zero time. I always double check everything. You never know what could be hiding. But once I saw that there was nothing else, pawn on f, meaning if Zoe had a mating combination, in case I would take the knight, I would be very concerned, or a combination how to take my queen, but there was none. I take it back. Of course, or if I had the mating combination myself, I would rather do the mate than take back the knight. But nothing of that was there. I take it back. Let's continue. You see here that the pawn on e5 is in danger for Zoe. Why? Because attacked twice by my knight on c4 and the queen on c7. Defended only by the queen on g3, so Zoe has to do something. And there are two somethings she could do. The bishop on e3 can go to either d4 or f4. I'm not sure which was the best. If anything, the computer doesn't like either of them, wants the knight to go to d2. I'm not sure why and sacrifice the pawn. Oh, and Zoe play because myself really that time was thinking that Zoe would place her bishop either on d4 or f4, nothing else. And I wasn't sure which would be the best for her, but in any case, she has to decide and not me. On f4, perhaps I could put my pawn to g5, and once he takes it, then I can try and find a way to take this pawn that's more central. In any case, Zoe plays her bishop on d4. And at this point, what I was concerned is currently my rook on h8 would be in danger if it was not for the e5 pawn. But how long can this pawn stay? Who knows what kind of crazy combination may end up with this pawn disappearing and Zoe meaning my rook on h8. That's why I wanted to get rid of this bishop. Let's exchange bishop to c5. Also, my bishop has a better square than e7. You see, move after move after move, computer has different best moves. There are not too many times we followed exactly the computer. Of course, it's easy to say this after the fact. During the game, we had no access to computer, no idea what was happening. And at this point, Zoe decided to push her pawn to a4. Why the pawn on b5 was unprotected, I'm not sure if I had any combination to take it, but she decided to support with b5 and potentially in the future have an attack along the queen side. When you do it, especially with my pawns on a and b, don't do it in order to promote. There's very small chance for that. You do it in order to mess up with the opponent's structure, especially the pawn structure. If you can double your opponent's pawns, that would be wonderful. I decided still not exchange, place my queen on b6. I want to apply as much pressure on d4 as possible. Mistakes in the computer would rather have me castle. The problem with castling is that my king is too exposed. First of all, it is once you castle, you cannot uncastle. You tell your opponent where is your king and they know where to attack. I don't want to castle either way. I wanted to apply more pressure on d4. Now you see the d4 bishop is attacked twice by bishop c5, queen b6, defended only by the pawn of c3. So Zoe needs to spend one move in order to defend the bishop on d4. Of course, he could also take the bishop first, but then, as I say, when to take is a mistake, meaning when pieces of equal value are staring each other and either one can take first, you would rather have, most of the times, there are exceptions, of course, most of the times you should allow your opponent to take first. Sometimes you want to try to even force your opponent to take first, putting them in a dilemma, either you take first or you lose material. But now Zoe places queen to d3. I want to put more pressure. Rook goes to c8. My rook from a8 that was doing nothing goes to c8 and starts participating in the game. And Zoe is going to develop the knight, goes to d2 now that the c3 pawn doesn't need protection any longer. And this is my move number 20. I have lots of choices. From doing nothing to taking the knight on d2 to taking the bishop on d4. But I decided to surprise her, do a move that is not even among the top. No, is the fifth possible move that you see here. Of course, you may be wondering, did Zoe know that this was only the fifth? No, she didn't know, of course, but it was something not too expected. I'm going to threaten her queen. After I saw that I'm not losing anything, no matter how I receive response, took me some time, I found it. Knight goes to b2. But computer thinks it's inaccuracy. And we completed the first 20 moves. And after that, Zoe is ahead by 0.51. Zoe with the white pieces. I threatened the queen. What can Zoe do? Many choices, but she decided to place her queen on e3. Both supporting the bishop on d4 and not being threatened by the knight on b2. Now I have to be careful. My knight is too far away, easy to get lost. So that is why I decided to be the first one to start exchanging. So I'm not going to be behind. There's no combination where Zoe will take more pieces than I do. Meaning she starts first, I do, then she does, I does, and in the end, she does, I do, then in the end, she takes a piece and I have no way to take it back. So I take here, and Joy has to take back either with the queen or with the pawn. Which is the best? If she took with the queen, we would exchange queens, and my rook on c8 would have a wonderful open c file, come to c2, protect my knight on b2, threaten d2, and who knows what. She was thinking about it, and she decided, by the way, Zoe was thinking quite a lot, on average 3 to 4 minutes per move. Uh, she was very, very serious, and that's why she was able to find some only moves at some parts, or the moves that I was afraid the most. Here we go. And what do I do now? My knight on b2 is, as I like to say, precarious, easy to be lost. So since it's going to be lost, let's at least lose it for something of at least equal value. Knight goes to c4, and you see here we have uh, what's called a fork or a double attack. It attacks both knight on d2, queen to e3. How to be saved? There are two ways. Either queen goes to a square like d3 or e2. So if she takes the knight, she takes back. Or she uses the knight to take my knight. And Zoe uses her knight to take my knight. Otherwise, the queen would be stuck defending this knight. That's why. Now, how do I take back? Either with a pawn or with a rook. If I take with a pawn, I have a passed pawn, but not too safe. It's protected by the rook. Maybe Zoe could take it if she put enough force against that. And then the d4 and d5 pawns, in the future, perhaps she could create a passed pawn of her own there by exchanging, for example, her d pawn with my e pawn, and then her e becomes a passed pawn. And of course, she'll do it not at any moment, but only when things will be very clear and her e pawn is going to be extremely strong. Now, perhaps may not be the time. That is why I decided not to take with the pawn and take with the rook. My rook has access to the entire c file. It's completely open. A wonderful strategic, I wouldn't call it advantage, but at least a nice element to have. Zoe doesn't like the fact that I'm monopolizing the c file, so she places her rook on c1, from f1 to c1. I don't want to give her the c file, which would happen if we changed rooks. I don't want her to let her take it, and then my pawn goes to c4. It's unprotected. I have to spend one move to protect it. Zoe starts attacking it, and most likely will be lost. That's why I move my queen to c7. This is a mistake, and I'm going to explain the mistake, although I saw it after the game, after discussing with some of my friends. The problem is that if Zoe took with, no, I won't. If Zoe took it with the rook, I cannot take back with the queen because rook can go here. And once queen goes anywhere, rook will go to c8 check and then win my rook. Then after queen goes anywhere, or not on the c file, we go here, and no matter where king goes, rook wins my rook. So I had to be very careful with that. But Zoe did not, fortunately for me, did not face me in this dilemma. Instead, she did another move I was also afraid. In fact, during the game, I was mostly concerned by the move that she actually played, not by this exchange. She moved her queen to h6. What's the problem? Had Zoe played an average move other than these two I mentioned, I was going to castle. And then my rook would go to f7 and or go to c8 and participate in the game. That was what I was hoping for. But unfortunately, in chess, there is a rule that says that you cannot castle to check. Castling for me now would be illegal. So, and this meant my rook was in a tough situation. If it moved, then Zoe might be able to take the h7 pawn. Not yet, because my queen on c7, but she could prepare for that. But what could I do? I don't want my rook to stand at the h8 square forever and not participate in the game, because as if I don't have a rook. So I took the chance and moved my rook to f8, which the computer says here it is the best. and my pawn on h7 is protected. And we completed the first 25 moves, and Zoe is ahead by 1.34. If you've followed carefully the evaluation, very few times I was ahead, and by very little. Most of the times Zoe was ahead, we were almost even. Zoe wants to win this pawn, and that's why she takes my rook on c4. I was expecting that. And now I have two choices. First of all, I must take the rook back. None of the moves other than taking back the rook makes any sense. But how? If I take it to the queen, see what's going to happen. Her queen takes my pawn. And if my queen decides to take this pawn to equalize the pawns, she takes my pawn on g6 with a check. And then uh, she can place a queen on f6, depending on how I reply. If my king goes to f7, she puts on f6. If it goes to anywhere else, it goes to g7. She gets at least an extra pawn and is near winning the other pawns and destroy me completely. I have to be very careful every move if it is safe or not. With her having not only directly taking the piece, but having forks, meaning king and rook or queen and pawn. That is why I played a move I didn't really like. The computer thinks the best. I used my pawn to take on c4. Why I don't like it? For the same reason I didn't like it before. Because the pawn on c4 is not very safe. And on the other side, the d and d pawns at the center for Zoe can become very strong later on. The computer says that there was an enormous difference. Look at that. If I played with my d pawn, Zoe is ahead by only 127. Or 129, whatever. If I take with my queen, Zoe is ahead by 514. And if I don't take back at all, she's ahead by 7.96. So what I played was really the best move. I didn't like it too much. I knew I was behind, but at least with this you can fight. I thought I was behind more than 110. 110 you can still fight. But let's see what happened. Queen goes back because to e3 because Zoe, of course, needs not to allow my pawn to be moved too far away. I want to bring my rook in the game on the c file, but not so easy if I rely on the rook itself because it needs one move to go to f7, second move the queen to move, third move for the rook to go to c7, and where can the queen even go? Cannot go c6 or c5, can only go to c8. To accelerate things, I found out a nice move that instead of 3 moves, I would need only 2 moves to place my rook on the file. So I placed my king to f7. Took me some time to figure it out. Computer thinks it's the best. And Zoe wants to completely stop my pawn from moving. Because currently, if she played anything else, could safely go to c3. Unless she plays her rook on c1. But most moves would have, there I could put my rook and still push it to c3. So they wanted to stop it completely. That's why she places her own queen on c3. My rook goes to c8. Exactly that's the reason why I had moved my king to f7. Give space for my rook to go to c8. Of course, Zoe is going to fight. Rook goes to c1. And so you see the pawn on c4 attacked twice by rook c1, queen c3, defended twice, queen c7, rook c8. And the big question is, will Zoe be able to play her king next to my pawn? For example, if she could bring it to b4, it would be wonderful. The question is, how can the king go from g1 to b4? But if the king would go there, she could win the pawn. On my side, of course, I would like to do something similar, to place my king on d5. But how can my king go from f7 to d5? After looking for all these options, I was looking for both of them, I realized that things are not easy at all. There's another element, as you may see, is that in both white and black, queens are in front of rooks. You don't want that because you may end up in a case where you have two forces attacking the pawn, one defending it, but it may happen that you'll win the pawn, but you sacrifice queen for rook. You don't want it. And I decided to be the first one to bring my queen away from the C file. So in order to do so, I pushed my pawn to B6. The third possible move on the computer agrees with the idea in principle, but wants me to do it faster by placing my queen either to D8 or E7 and then go to H4. I decide something else. Pawn to B6 so queen can go to B7. And at this point, Zoe plays her rook on B1. I'm not sure. Yes, I saw what. I would see later. That time I didn't see why she did it. My queen goes to B7, and we completed the first 30 moves. And what is the score? I'm ahead not by too much, by 0.03, whatever that may mean. And Zoe saw that my queen could go to E4, and really it would have a nice position at the central, very dangerous one. And that's why she stopped it by placing her pawn on F3. Yes, it opens the diagonal that go inaccuracies at the computer. But then my queen would go to, I don't know what I would do. But I would place my queen on E4, even though the computer may not like it. But she stopped it. And also the diagonal goes from A7 to G1 that opens now. Zoe cannot exploit it. I don't have a dark color bishop. And my queen has has no squares. It has access there. My queen goes to D5. So by doing so, I support my pawn on C4 twice, but the first support is by the rook on C8 and not by the queen. Zoe does something similar. She places a rook on B4. That's why she moved it to B1. So she attacks the pawn twice, but her first attack is with rook and not with queen. So we both optimized in this area. And then we decided to start attacking along the FGH file. See if I could do anything with the pawns, push them as far as possible. And while Zoe was preoccupied with defending against the C4 pawn, perhaps I could have an attack along the king side, FGH. First of all, pawn goes to G5. Zoe followed what theory says in the end game, centralize your king. King goes to F2. My pawn goes to H5. I'm pushing my pawns as much as possible. King goes to E2. Pawn goes to F4. So I'm denying the square E3. Zoe has no access to E3. And she doesn't have access to D3 because of my two pawns. So her king, what can it do? It cannot even go to B4 that I was thinking before because now the rook was on B4. And just to tell you, if there was no en passant in chess, I would have pushed my pawn from A7 to A5 and throw back the rook and have better access to C4. But there is something called en passant, the pawn from B. If I did this at any point, Zoe would do that. And then the the A6 pawn is near promotion. I would have to fight for that. I would be a pawn down and so on. King goes to F2 back for Zoe, and now my pawn goes to H4. I wanted to push the pawns as much as possible. I'm not sure if that was the best move. Computer will say that it was just good. Would rather have the G go ahead and exchange there and perhaps bring my rook and have a possibility of an attack. At this point, we completed the first 35 moves, and let's see the score. 0.00. We are completely even. Had I pushed G4, I would be ahead a little bit by 0.40. Meaning they would have a chance of an attack, but under best place, under best play, I doubt it would achieve anything. Let's see how game continue. Pawn to H3 for Zoe wants to stop me. And now cannot push the pawn to G3 because it's going to be lost for nothing. And now I decided, let me start bringing my king. What it could do, I doubt it could do anything because even if it went to H5 and pawn to G4, again, I would lose it for nothing. And my queen had to stay on D5, otherwise the C4 pawn is lost from the moment that the rook ended up on B4. Game continues. King goes to E2. By the way, by this point, Zoe had very little time left. Less than 5 minutes. I had about half an hour. I had used quite a lot of time thinking, but not all of my time. I wanted to make sure that if we went into a very tricky king and pawn ending, I would have enough time to play clearly, while Zoe was really would go down to her last 2 minutes in the end. My king goes to h6. What I was afraid? I was afraid that if queen would go to c2, it could go then to g6 or c7. Let me draw the arrows. And from there, really have a nasty attack. If the king did not block the squares, you could take, for example, g5, then maybe f4, for h4. I had better be careful for that. In chess, you need to anticipate your opponent's plans. King goes to f2 for Zoe, and Zoe at this point, she really started fighting for the draw because her time was very, very little. If there was a complicated game with too much thinking, she might be out of time. Myself, I had to make sure my king would not go to either h7 or g6 because then queen c2 check and Zoe enters my area through that diagonal. That's why I would send my king to g7. Ooh, computer wants my king to go to g6 for best move. But all of them, all top five, they're the same. They're 0.00. King goes to g7. Again, you see here all top five choices are 0.00. Unless players blunder, it's a draw. Then move number 39, king to e2. You see the repetition on my side. I'm not sure if we had the threefold repetition, but either way or other, we would go for that. And after Zoe played that move, I told her I think it's a draw, and she agreed. So the game ended in a draw. And in this way, I ended this tournament. I played 4 players, all of them having. Damn it, where are we? That's not what I want to do. We ended up all 4 games of the Queen Chess Club Amateur Tournament. And I played against 4 players, all of them with higher rating than mine. As I said, although some of them was very little, the difference. I had 2 wins, 1 draw, and 1 loss, 2.5 out of 4 points. I'm satisfied with this result. And my rating, of course, tentative rating from it had gone already up from 1551 to 1631 after the December Swiss, and now it went up to 1680. This is 3 points below my highest ever, that was many years ago, 1683. I'm happy with my results. Zoe played a very good game and she was very, very careful. She found only moves. She used all of her time. Just less than 2 minutes remain in the end. And this is really to be applauded because this shows how seriously she took it. And of course, I wish her all the best in the future. Our team, as I mentioned before, I got 2.5 out of 4. My teammate got 0 out of 4, 4 losses. So, a team, we called ourselves the last moment and we got the last position. But let's not talk too much about that. Let's see what happens in the other things involved, the tournaments. I'm participating in a lot of tournaments, as you can see. In Greco chess, nothing has changed. 1 game away from the end, Barak 7 leads with 5 points against 4 for Maxim Govorucha. There is 1 game between them remaining. If Maxim Govorucha wins this game, he ties. If Barak 7 can take it at least a draw, then Barak 7 is going to be the champion. Let's wait until the game is over. And let's give a look at the game organized by my subscriber Zanilor. The Moonlight Underwater. Underwater Moonlight, the Nine Moons Tournament, the official name. excuse me, 81 players started, 28 made it to the second round, four groups of seven, three from each of them go ahead in. Group 1, Maxim Govoruka leads with 9 points. Zanilor, the organizer and my subscriber, has not yet concluded any of the games, so a lot depends on how he does in his games. In Group 2, it has finished. Two games remain, but nothing will change. Möbius from Nigeria, PGO 74 from Italy, Mathis B 2008 from France have advanced. Group 3, all games have been completed. Sinan Fu from Greenland is the winner. Iraq Lion from Iraq and Steamed Rocket from Australia are advancing. And Group 4, again, it's over, although one game remains. But this game will not decide anything. Vivaladivya from India, Lysithia Vantres from Japan, and Viankar Vanans from Malaysia have advanced. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this video. Thanks everybody for watching. What is ahead? Tomorrow, February 1st, we are going to have the Chess Sanity Tournament, and I'm going to participate. I'm expected to play 3 games, and the next 3 videos, and not. I'll try before this tournament to have one more video with puzzle ratings, but then the next 3 videos are going to be the games from Christianity. Then I will continue with facing the bots. We next bots are 1600 bots. We completed the 1500 bots. And thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to the subscribers. If you could not subscribe, please consider doing so. To the likes, comments, we have some nice comments recently. And thanks to all the viewers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Greco Chess. I'm your host, Charilaos Eniziris, and for now, goodbye.